And we're live, I think. Are we live?
Yes.
Okay, yay, because I'm not seeing myself, so this is good to find out that we are live. Welcome everyone to the Connected Courses. We're working with Unit 3 this week, and Monday we had, I found a really awesome conversation about what's going on with the web and kind of our web imperatives, things we wish we'd be thinking about. And Mark Surman just joined the group. Hi, Mark.
I did, but you know what? I'm gonna just rejoin because I got put on a slow network, and so I'm just gonna switch back to the network.
See you in a moment. Okay. So everyone, we're going to do some quick introductions, particularly when Mark gets back to the group. And then unlike Monday's conversation, today we're just going to throw out some questions for each other, particularly thinking about what is this thing called the web, and what do we mean when we say people need web literacies, plural. And we're hoping that people who are able to watch the live hangout will tweet with us using the hashtag #CCourses and pose some questions. We have such a great panel to draw from, so I'm hoping to take advantage of asking some questions of these nice folks, as Howard says, esteemed co-learners, and we can have a good conversation. So Gardner, do you want to kick us off just with a quick introduction, and then we can go down the line? Gardner, Howard, Laura, Mark, Pat, me, and just a brief who you are and why you might be on something like this about web literacies.
Well, I was walking in the hallway and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Hey, you want to be part of a webinar?" No, that's not true. I'm Gardner Campbell. I'm Vice Provost for Learning Innovation and Student Success at Virginia Commonwealth University, also an Associate Professor of English. And I've been using the web in various ways in teaching and learning really since about 1995. It was a fascinating thing to me from the very beginning. My earliest memory of the web was sitting in a classroom in the computer science department watching a page slowly appear, and then the magic moment happened when they said you could make one of those right now yourself and publish it to the world. After that, I was in. Next, please.
Howard, you want to go next?
Okay, sure. Well, if we're going to talk about our ancient memories of the web, there was a point at which the web in California was Dale Doherty traveling around with a luggable laptop showing people the web on a pre-Mosaic browser. If you read Tim Berners-Lee's book, Weaving the Web, he'll talk about that. And he came by the Whole Earth Review office where I was the editor and showed it to me, and I wanted that. I can't really believe the capabilities to do what we're doing right now are available. They all seemed nascent back in 1993, and that someday we would have that. So now we're in an era where we've got a whole lot of new skills that people need if they're going to succeed, and if the Commons is going to succeed. So my last book, Net Smart, was all about social media literacies. That's my particular facet of web literacy.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks, Howard. I'm Laura Hilliger, and when I was a kid, when the web became something that the public could use, my mom and my dad got a connection, and it was, the ancient modem sounded like nails on a chalkboard. And I used to sneak out of bed at night and go into news groups and chat forums because I really liked trying on different identities. And I just fell in love with how people would respond to me based on who I was for that particular day. And I've been kind of a geek ever since. I really wanted to figure out how it worked and what I could do with it. And so I started playing with it and building it and tinkering around. And nowadays I get to pretty much do that for a living. So it feels like a good spot to be in. I'll pass it over to Mark.
Thank you, Laura. So early memories of the web, and then why do we care about web literacy today? Oh, I'm falling off the camera. You know, as a teenager like Laura, and we share some similar history, cared a lot about the idea, and still care a lot about the idea that everybody should have a voice. And for me, that was punk rock, and that was picking up a video camera and making my own documentaries. It was a very big, expensive video camera at the time, and putting them on public access TV. And so that always has been my passion, was, you know, everyone should have a voice, and everyone has creativity inside them, and that's a core part of, you know, being human and envisioning the society we want. And, you know, like Gardner, you know, I've been online with email and news groups for a while, but when I first saw those web pages and someone said, hey, you can make one of those, it was like, why am I, you know, lugging around this big video camera? This is going to be the future of, you know, the creativity and expression. And really, from about '94, my whole career has been dedicated to empowering people with the internet. I ran an ISP in the early days of the web, and many other things. And what is amazing, I guess, two things. One, you know, the fantasies we had of empowering people with public access television in the '70s and '80s and early '90s, you know, we could never have imagined what happened with YouTube and what's happened with cell phone camcorders, what happened with the Arab Spring. So many of our dreams have come true beyond our wildest imagination, and that is an exciting thing about the web. But on the flip side, you know, as we get to the point where within the next 10 years we'll have 5 or 6 billion people on the internet, really living on the internet is going to be something that all of us do. You know, we will all either be digital or dead as a society 50 years, 100 years, 300 years from now. And so it's a very different thing to imagine that world from 1993, 1994, 1995. Everyone will need to, in order to participate in society, understand the language of the web, the language of the digital world. And I think we're at a juncture now where we have to choose, what is that digital world going to look like, and what kind of empowerment do we want people to have, you know, not just 5 or 10 years from now, but, you know, what do we want it to be like in terms of all of us being able to shape our society in the next few hundred years. And that, for me, is why the web literacy piece, which comes from, in my heart, that spark of wanting to make the first web page, but is about those 6 billion people and the next few generations, is so key. Is we all need to have that moment in our life, and we all need to be able to weave the power that comes with being able to create into our lives. And the way things are headed, we don't treat that seriously. We don't treat it as seriously as needing to teach people to read, write, and do math. And I think we've got to fix that, and now is the time.
Thanks, Mark. My name is Patrick Berry. The web hit right when I was in college. A friend who is in computer science pulled me over to the lab and showed me Mosaic, and he's like, this changes everything. And he's been convincing me of that every day since then. I've done web development pretty much since then, since he showed me how to make those web pages in your little text editor. So I worked for him in web development, and then I went on to work at the Electronic Frontier Foundation to help protect people to do that work on the web. I just want to do a quick little thing when Kim said multiple literacies, and I was thinking back to the video that from earlier this week when there's a lot of talk about you have to know how to make things for the web. It's not just making web pages, because I was like, well, what's right below the web pages? You have to go into the infrastructure. And it just hit me, those are the multiple literacies. It's, there's the making the page, but then there's also okay, well, if you want to go a little bit deeper, then there's the infrastructure literacy. And so I'm excited to talk about that.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks, everyone. So what's really interesting is how we fall right into story when we talk about how we ended up hanging out in a web. And as Mark says, it's not really an option anymore. I keep telling people, this isn't a fad. And so I invite everyone who's on the Twitter chat, and it's starting to happen, to just tell your own stories of how this became an interest for you. I will admit it that I think I probably represent more the teacher audience in this group, as far as coming at it not from a programmer side or a developer side or making my own things, you know, really early on. I've said before, huge gamer, and I've always had Atari hooked up in my living room. That never stopped ever since I was even, you know, 11. I've still had my Atari, still do. But I think for me, it was about seeing the potential of the platform as an instructor and wanting to make sure that my students' voices were being heard, and seeing this huge potential to connect them to real communities of practice in the world. So the admittance I was going to make is, I think really the getting on the web, like many people, and Howard mentioned this, was, you know, an AOL CD came in the mail. And then I ended up having, you know, a 5-year-old at the time, and in, you know, 95, who was playing computer games, you know, playing Lion King and stuff. And so it made me want to understand more from a parent side and then an instructor side. So yeah, interesting histories of how we come to it. So the conversation, I'd like to throw this out to the group because I think this is really important. I think that as part of understanding web literacies, there's all these different concepts that I feel like those of us who hang out a lot just take for granted. And so I thought maybe this group would be awesome at thinking through, first of all, what are some threshold concepts of the web? What's the difference between the internet and the web? And people use those interchangeably. And so what is this thing called the web? And what makes it web-like? What makes something web-like? So I thought I'd throw that out to the group and just have you pick that up, and I'll follow Twitter feed. And I'm going to try not to fangirl out over all of you, by the way. I'm like, oh my God, look at the faces on this panel. This is awesome. So yeah, what's the web?
Maybe I'll jump in and take my first shot, which is, you know, I often, when trying to get to that, the answer to that question, and it's an interesting question because for those of us who hang out a lot, I think we probably have a set of answers, but not a crisp way to talk about it. And then when we talk to people who don't think about it very much, it also seems very abstract. So the metaphor I love to use is to talk about the web as being a big Lego set. And really what is, you know, powerful is the building blocks are standard. In fact, they're open standards, just like a set of Lego bricks. But within that set of constraints, within that set of building blocks, you can build anything that your imagination, your imagination can come up with. Any great piece of art, a business, a way to interact with your friends. And like a Lego set, what is amazing about it is you can both see the lines on the bricks. You can see sort of how it's constructed. That's a bunch of small bricks put together. That's a bunch of big bricks. And we go and we view source, so we think about really just being able to understand and be literate in the components of the web. We can see what that set of Lego bricks is that's made something. And from that, and we have this cool tool called X-ray goggles, which is sort of, you just turn it on a web page, you can see the pieces like that Lego set of lines in the Lego set. Once you see that, it is a built-in invitation to take it apart and reconfigure it. And really, we've never had, I mean, other than maybe folk music, a mass medium in the history of human society that has invited us so much to take it apart and reconfigure it. And to me, that is really one of the most wonderful and critical things that we preserve about the web, is that Lego-ness. And of course, it is one of the things that also, in the sort of open sourcey, building on the shoulders of giants kind of metaphor, also lets us innovate so quickly. Because if we can see what others have built, and we can see that it's Lego, we do a few tweaks, or we add another room on the Lego house, or whatever we do, and we innovate very fast. We don't have to ever start from scratch. And you should all watch the Lego movie, because it's exactly about that, as well as the evil threats which are upon us.
I wanted to add that sometimes starting around 1996, 1997, the web started getting social. I'd say the immediate answer to what's the web is that you have to think of the hyperlink as being what the originator of the web, Tim Berners-Lee, added on to the internet. A lot of connected computers that weren't. It wasn't easy to go from one computer to another with a hyperlink. You just click and you can see a page. And now, of course, we've got multimedia, so we're able to do what we're doing here. But I think the addition of the ability for people to communicate socially to an environment with all of this information in many forms is what is uniquely powerful about the web. And therefore, I think when you talk about skills and literacies and fluencies, you really have to talk about the social component. These are not solitary skills. Even though you may be using them for yourself and sitting alone in your room, they have to do with connecting with other people.
Yep.
And I'll just follow up a little bit on that. Senator Ted Stevens famously said, you know, the internet is not like a dump truck, but he was, I think, closer than he thought. I've explained the difference between the internet and the web to people before. It's like the web is the cities, and the internet is, you know, our interconnecting, you know, highways and freeways. You know, that's the infrastructure that gets things from one point to another. But like with just roads, you know, you have to have something that goes over the roads and destinations to get to. And then I think of, like, you know, websites as cities, communities, social.
Well, I would jump in to say that as I keep trying to explain this to students, to faculty, and try to articulate, so how is the web significantly different from the internet? I think that, and maybe this is a threshold concept we could discuss, really the boundary that you cross when you get into the web is that anybody can link anything to anything else. It's like the internet itself, except now it's part of how you articulate your experience on the internet. You know, I remember Gopher, I remember Wace, I remember, you know, anonymous FTP into Washington University in St. Louis, and making connections that way. I remember bulletin boards, making connections that way. But one of the things that really excited me about putting up my first web pages is that I could begin to enact the connections I made in my own mind in a way that was very powerful. It was a link that when you clicked on it would actually take you to the other thing I was thinking about. And it's a very small thing, it's a very humble thing, but I think it's the thing that as soon as you have a medium that supports linking from anything to anything, you immediately have something that's going to become an ecosystem. It's implied, it's right there. And that's the thing that the internet itself, though it had a very permissive technical architecture, didn't really enact in the kind of thing you landed on first off. I couldn't make a Gopher menu, right? I didn't know how to do that. But I could make a web page, and I could have links that went to other web pages. And I find that students, when they make their own web pages, often don't think of the fact that the web derives its value primarily from the links. So I have to remind them, link out to interesting things in interesting ways, and don't take that for granted.
Laura, do you want to? Oh, sorry.
Just one very quick counterpoint, and if you've seen the Lego movie, you know, one of the things you know is that the Craggle, which is the evil crazy glue, was going to make it so the Lego couldn't be taken and reconfigured, which I think is sort of what you have in an Android or an iPhone. But to Gardner's point, I think linking really is something we take for granted, and that in the world of native apps, which is becoming the dominant way that we use the internet on most of the time on our phones, that linking is not something that is built in, you know, to what's there. Yes, it happens a little in certain ways, but it really isn't in the architecture, and I think it is critical to remember that it is the core to the architecture and the soul of the web.
Yeah. Actually, I think it was Pat, I'm sure it was Pat, who shared with me a long time ago. Ben Ward had this blog, it was like 2010, about, it was really helpful in understanding kind of, Mark, what you were just talking about in terms of the difference between apps and an open web, and kind of these apps as kind of closed islands where your stuff lived, but it was hard to get out. And the difference we're talking about, because I'm not sure that everybody understands that you have all these apps on your phone, but apps aren't the open web. And I found that article to be really helpful, even though it was very geek and tech heavy, and I'll tweet it out. You know, I thought it might be good for us that we've been saying threshold concepts, and we actually have that in our Unit 3 week. And just in a nutshell, when Gardner and Chris and Howard and I all met this summer, we were trying to think about threshold concepts, which are used in lots of fields, and I just want to make sure people understood. It's kind of a core concept that when you understand it, it transforms your perception of the thing. And I think that a really good example that is used often is that if you're in nursing, your understanding of pain or the concept of pain is very different than someone outside of that field. Like, it's very nuanced. And so we were trying to think through, what are the threshold concepts of the web? When's the moment when it changes your understanding, or I get this, so it changes my understanding? So I just wanted to kind of put that out there in case people are like, what do they keep saying threshold concepts for? And Lauren, Howard, you might want to chime in on what is the web and or threshold concept ideas.
I actually think that one of the threshold concepts for me is the idea of community, because the web allows us to connect with people who might not be in our local area or in our physical real life social circles, but who we might identify with in a deeper way in some form or fashion. And I mean, I remember when I found my first online community and what that felt like to belong somewhere, because I was a really weird kid and I didn't have a lot of friends. And so when I found that online, and I used to go to the same chat room over and over and over again, every night the same chat room, and it was always the same people in there, and they made me feel like I belonged, and it changed the way that I looked at the world. And then later in life, when I found the Mozilla community, and I started to understand that we can do that both in an online and an offline environment, that you can have a global community of people that care about a specific thing and take steps to bring people along with whatever that thing is. I mean, I guess it just increased my feeling of belonging. And for me, I think that all of us as human beings, we want to belong. And I think that the web makes that possible in circumstances where it might be hard for people.
I'll throw my threshold concept that Kim challenged me to come up with the other night, and I had to really think, what are those aha moments? And I was just going back and reading, Wikipedia, the history, and trying to really dig in and think back, like, what were the things that really keyed me into how everything worked, and then it kind of hit me. We even have this poster up in the office, and it's the verbs of the web. I gotta talk about the. Hello? Okay. And basically, like, what happens when you click a link? When you click a link, you are issuing a GET request. I don't want to get too nerdy, but you're basically saying, "Hi, web server, please give me this thing," and it dutifully, says okay, or oops, not found. Or when you're uploading a photo, you're posting, you're saying, like, "Here, web server, take this photo and please put it somewhere." When I got those concepts, like, everything about how the web worked and how I could build more things, like, really just came into a very clear focus. So those were my core concepts. And you don't have to get, like, too nerdy about it either. It's just like, it's literally just verbs.
Laura had mentioned community, and I think we have to understand that before the web, we had two things that communication media had not really given us before. One was the ability to find and connect with people with whom you shared an interest, whether you had met them or they were on the other side of the world or not. We now take that for granted, and this forum is a great example of that. And the other one is that it's a many-to-many medium, and that the control over communication that had been granted to a few was granted to many. And again, we take that for granted now. That does not necessarily make for a healthy commons. We've got all kinds of bad stuff going on online, and I think that one of the most important web literacies has to do with the individual responsibility for increasing the quality of participation online in those communities and in those many-to-many communications that we have.
So I'll piggyback on that and talk about network effects as a threshold concept. And I want to tell a story about a student I had in a class when I was at Virginia Tech a couple of years ago. It was a class called Cognition, Learning, and the Internet. And we spent a lot of time thinking about various kinds of threshold concepts and everything from information science to the World Wide Web. My friend John Udell came in as a guest speaker for one of the classes, and he talked about this idea he has of awakening grains of sand. And by that he means if you put something out onto the internet, but you start to use some of the internet, or in this case, of course, the web's properties to awaken that grain of sand, something very improbable happens. You, as one person among billions of people on the web and the planet, can suddenly be indexed by search engines, can find other serendipitous connections. You can actually introduce something into this conversation. If you keep at it, that will start to have all these effects far beyond any that you'd ever anticipated. And he wrote it up, and he quoted the student's blog post, which began, "I'm going to completely admit that before this class I knew absolutely nothing about the World Wide Web and internet infrastructure. Who knew they weren't the same internet and web? Who knew they were different?" But then she says, "We decide what we want to make. When it comes to the World Wide Web, our imagination is our only limit. We decide who we're going to share it with, what we want it to mean." And then she coined a word, Dacolupatoni. I'll put this in the Twitter feed here in a minute. And she said, when you Google that, nothing comes up. But here's our experiment. Let's search it. And in a few hours, let's see if that grain of sand has awakened. And John wrote his blog post about my student's blog post and said, essentially, let's help her wake this grain of sand up. Let's make this idea that when you are in the network and putting stuff onto the network, you're actually increasing the network's power to discover the kinds of things that you're making. Let's make those powers of awakening grains of sand strong. So for me, that's another threshold concept, that you think you're one among many grains of sand on this virtual beach. You're one little bitty node in the World Wide Web, but the web has these interesting properties, and if you begin to understand how to use them to amplify the effect of what you're doing, don't leave that just to the spammers. You do that as an author too. You can have an influence all out of proportion to anything that you would ever imagine. So I'll put Dacolupatoni in there. You can all Google it. It actually brings up over 100 results right now, so I'm very proud.
Okay, that's awesome. So because I want to make sure we have this conversation, especially when we have Mark and Laura with us, I've been thinking a lot for a long time about what it means to teach the web or web literacy. And here's my fear, and so maybe you guys could speak to my fears. I don't have any trouble with teaching web literacy. Obviously that's exactly what we need to do. And if we are talking about the thing Gardner said, which is understanding the power of network, and what Howard says in terms of how do we help people be kind on the web and have some norms for how to be on the web and all those things that we hope people learn to do. My fear is this. My fear is that as someone who studies literacy, what happens with the teaching of writing in schools. It becomes developmental. People think of it as learning vocabulary before you learn something else, instead of getting access to the whole or getting access to the identities that use writing in particular ways or the communities. And so my fear is that if we say kids need to learn to code and kids need to learn some web literacy and we put it in school, that it will, I can just imagine the quiz questions, right? So you want to make your text red. A, is it FF00, right? I can just see, memorizing the HTML color code as the new periodic table. So how do we make sure that what we mean when we talk to people who make decisions about curriculum and teachers around what we mean by web literacy, that we don't turn it into the 5-paragraph essay or spelling test kind of thing. So, and I know obviously, Mark and Laura, you have tons of experience with how Mozilla Foundation does this through things like X-ray goggles and thimble and popcorn, and I thought maybe you guys could speak to that.
You want to go first, Laura, or you want me to go?
Doesn't matter. We both have tons of ideas, I'm sure.
Well, let me start by saying, Kim, who said anything about school? And I think that the core, so certainly the core of what we believe is that if we want literally billions of people to really, as they come onto the internet or as they use the internet every day, to understand how to read, write, and participate in the web, and those are the 3 things we think of as the core competencies, that you want to learn those things through practice, experientially, through making things. That's the reason we have Maker in WebMaker is really a core commitment to ambient, all the time experiential learning being at the core of what we want to do. And there then are the questions of how do you recognize or assess and recognize that. We really treated those as secondary, although we are digging into a bunch of that. And as you do, try to think about where this gets into formal, or semi-formal learning institutions like libraries and museums and so on, you do start to have to answer some of those questions. And so for us, it is about a combination of experiential hands-on learning, tools like X-ray goggles that you just tinker and learn and make things right away, as well as peer feedback and peer assessment as something to build into the system so it's not a test, but are you making stuff that delights people, that shows craft, all of those kind of things. And I think we do eventually want to see schools treat this as something seriously, but it is a big reason why, and I don't know fully the audience, even this is a DML hub, how connected learning jargony you are, but it is a reason we've been so involved, like from the very, very beginning, like literally the first meeting in San Francisco of coming up with the thinking around connected learning with MacArthur, is we believe learning has to happen differently across society, and that it needs to be interest-driven and peer-based, and the academic framework is just then one piece that ties back into those things. So, certainly our starting point is who said anything about school. We should all be able to learn this all the time as we use the web. And yes, at a certain point, we do need to think about it seriously in an academic context, but we need new frames for learning as we do that.
I would only add that peer learning is a threshold concept for the web. You used to have to go to school, and schools are important, but they are no longer a monopoly. We can learn from each other and with each other.
Laura, are you back?
Yeah, I crashed in the middle of that, so forgive me if I repeat something that either Mark or Howard said. I was just going to jump off of what Mark was talking about in terms of, we want to bring people to making the web and tinkering around with it. I think that a really important concept within that is this idea that we want to help people learn about the competencies and skills that we're talking about when we think about web literacy around their own interests. So we really care that people are coming to learn this stuff because they want to, because they have something that they want to express, because they want to use their voice on this amazing global platform that we have, and helping them to do something that matters to them. And like Mark said, I think that we've gotten in our formal education systems into a little bit of a quagmire because we've put a lot of processes and policies into place that are not necessarily for the good of learning, but rather make it easier from to operate the system. And we live in a day and age where we, really need to reassess how our educational system is built. And in the meantime, I think that informal learning systems and peer-to-peer learning is absolutely the way that we move forward with the types of learning that we want to do and with the concepts that we want to address without getting stuck.
Yeah, I couldn't, I mean, obviously, agreeing so much with you both, and the thing I mean, I don't find it as challenging anymore, except when I go to talk to colleagues who I feel like I have to step way back and think about concepts of how people learn, like way back. Like if you don't understand situated learning or play or tinkering or all these new frameworks or peer-to-peer learning or networked learning or open or connecting your course, I just think about every time how far back I have to step with the conversation in order to help them understand what I'm doing in my class. So, for example, if you walk into my class, I've had people say sentences like, "It doesn't look like you're teaching." Like they don't know what they're looking at, because it's students working and making meaning and doing things and sitting at tables, and they're researching their own projects and they're doing research teams together. But it doesn't look like I'm doing anything. It looks like I'm just hanging out with them. And so I think it's hard for people to recognize how is that teaching. I think those of us who do this kind of work, we're over the days where this seems rogue or different. Or what, Gardner and I talked about that this summer too, that being on your campus where that's seen as rogue behavior instead of just normal to be tinkering and playing and making meaning. Yeah.
Well, having seen Kim in person teaching these classes, one of the things that is always fascinating, especially when she's doing web literacy, is that the web is so young and so new. Everyone is learning together at the same time. Even like the teacher is learning as they go, and that really runs counter to a lot of what we think about how learning is supposed to happen. And that's probably where a lot of the the pushback comes. I've seen Kim have to explain to people again and again that it's okay that the expert is not at the front of the room telling everyone else how things need to go. So, but it's like the smartest people I know about the web know that like tomorrow a new thing is going to come out that they're not going to know about, and that they're going to have to either pick that up or decide, I can't pick that up. I got to go pick up this other thing. It's so expansive that I think that really blows a lot of people's minds.
Well, there is absolutely something mind-blowing about this. I mean, I think one of the threshold concepts is actually not a threshold concept at all. I guess it's a whole new way of thinking, but it has to do with understanding the way complexity works. This is a lot more like an organism than it is like a set of tinker toys put together. I think about the very early days in which Yahoo was doing something that seemed absolutely commonsensical, of course. They were collecting all the websites and categorizing them in an easy-to-use directory. So if you were interested in business and finance, you could click on that category and you would find a lovely little set of links leading you to important web resources. So I guess they were figuring, well, shoot, the Manhattan phone book, I mean, that's pretty thick. We could probably make it to that. And then, of course, someone had a completely different idea. Let's use links as indications of connections and relevance and importance, and let's do it that way, bottom up instead of top down. Now, of course, the link strategy has its own difficulties, as Google found out, but their idea was right, and it's more in tune with what the web really is, and it's mind-blowing. It's not anything we encounter in our usual lives. It really is much more like an organism, something complex built out of many, many iterations of fairly simple kinds of structures, than it is like something that, is the Empire State Building, bolted together, or something you could put in a phone book. And I think this relates to what Kim was saying about teaching. I think a lot of people believe that learning and teaching are like putting a number of methods, exercises, modules, whatever, end to end. You start here, you define your outcomes, you get here, your outcomes are done, problem solved. That's not complexity. It really isn't the way the web works. And at a certain point, it's just not very interesting. Why would you want to limit yourself to that?
Howard, can you say a little bit about curation? Because I saw you kind of bring that up in our chat, and I thought that would be interesting as kind of a web literacy.
You know, I think there's a kind of an Uber theme here, which is that learning web literacies points in two directions. It's for the individual. The individual who knows these skills is going to do better than they would if they did not know these skills. But it's also, I think, the best answer to how do we improve the quality of the online commons. There is just such a huge tidal wave of dreck out there, and we're not really taught in school. The schools are slow to catch up to the technology, how we can find the best stuff. We can find it for each other. So the word curation is used a lot, and my definition is you make a decision about what is worth paying attention to, and you share that decision with others. And ideally, you share the context. You tell them why this is a good resource and what it's a good resource for. And we have all sorts of great tools. We've got hashtags, we've got tags, we've got curation platforms, we've got social bookmarking, we've got Digo and Delicious, and we've got platforms like Pinterest and Scoopit and many others. When individuals make these decisions about quality that we have to make in order to find our way, and we make those decisions public, then all of those little decisions add up, just as all of those little links add up to the web. All of those little decisions about quality add up to a public good. The more people who curate, the more we will be able to rise the good stuff to the top. There are tools for kind of censoring out the worst of the garbage. We really need human judgment and a kind of social judgment in order to increase that layer at the top that people have vetted and described and tagged and linked.
Yeah, it's really, I'm right now in the middle of Meaningful Play, the conference at Michigan State University. And of course, when you're talking about gaming right now, you can't avoid talking about the social media platforms and the open web because of all the really horrible things that are going on with women in technology right now. And one of the things we were saying, Howard, after Lisa Nakamura gave the opening talk on Wednesday, and I'll tweet that out for people. We were saying, you know, the tools aren't enough anymore. The structure of different platforms aren't enough anymore because you can't block everybody. And in fact, that's not what we want. We want to encourage dialogue. I don't want to close comments and block users, and that's my way to help people understand how to function on the web. But we are going to have to think about kinder curation, kinder ways of being, how to be a nicer human on the web, and so that we can leave the dialogue open. The other thing that came up, and I was hoping you guys could speak to, is we had a discussion about working with faculty and the fear when someone, you know, I have faculty I work with who maybe don't know what a URL is or aren't sure how to use a flash drive. And I get in fights with people because they think that you need to learn in order, like you need to learn steps instead of just jumping into, like if you want to learn Minecraft, just go get on Minecraft, right? If you want to learn Twitter, just go be on Twitter. But is that a fair statement? Do you think that there are any kind of developmental work going on, or do you think it's like ways of being or habits of being, like maybe learning not to be fearful? I'm just not sure learning how to use a flash drive helps you learn how to use Twitter, right? So I'm hoping that the support for faculty maybe moves beyond my own hope as they move beyond this idea of you have to learn these little steps. But I thought maybe you guys could speak to that. Like, what is it when you're just starting out? What's the best way to do it? Yeah.
So what we're doing with the WebMaker training program, we have both online and offline learning that is professional development for people who want to teach the web. And the materials themselves, the curriculum and the program that we run, it's not about learning how to use a tool, and it's not about learning how to code a thing. I mean, we do those things, but much more than that, it's about helping people understand what open collaboration is, how you can participate in that, and helping people really get past this fear that we talked about on Monday and that keeps coming up for some reason. If people feel like, oh, I'm not really technical, they get very afraid. And so the training program that we do is really about sort of helping people, A, get past their fear, B, feel like a member of something, of a community. And I think that it actually works really well, because one of the things that we do quite well in our training program is really shift the dynamic of like the authority structure of education or professional development. Most people come to our trainings and they expect that someone is going to be standing at the front of the room, and what they get is not that in any way, shape, or form. It is everybody in a circle, everybody having an equal voice, and everybody participating full on. And it always, I mean, every live training that I've done has resulted in people coming up to me and saying, oh my God, I didn't know that we could do this. And it's so interesting because these people are educators and they can do this. And this is like theory that they learned way back when, that, you know, you can put people in groups together and get them to explore a concept and a theme while they're learning other social and technical skills. But for whatever reason, people need to be reminded, particularly adults need to be reminded, because we sat in rows in school for our entire school career, and now we're out in the world and we see learning a certain way. And so I think Mozilla is an organization that really tries to shake up that vision, that understanding of what it means to, you know, to be in a workshop or be in a class. And it's really fun too.
I have a funny story. You mentioned you know, helping people understand what it is to be, you know, collaborative. When I was working at California State University of Chico with Kim, one of the computer science professors came and was like, hey, you know, what should our students, you know, be learning? And we brought up like, well, they should know GitHub. And he looked at GitHub and he's like, this will be great. I can use this to help prevent cheating. I'm like, no. And, you know, we ran through it, and like, yeah, you could do that, or you could use it as a collaborative platform, and people would need to collaborate to show that, you know, they were participating with the group, and GitHub would be a tool that you could use to see what people contributed to the project, not to, you know, wrap their knuckles with a ruler. And it worked out pretty well. And so not only were they learning to collaborate, but they were learning like a real world thing. So that was my little story on that.
Gardner, did you tell me you have something you wanted to talk about web and tempo?
Yes, I did. What a strange thing. First of all, no, I don't think you need to know how to use a flash drive before you get into the web. Although I think it's a natural question when people are looking at something as procedural and not conceptual. It's the same sort of thing that sometimes I'll hear from students who say, well, my paper got a B, but if I wrote 3 more pages, would that be an A? And I'm like, no, it's not about that. It's about something else, and we need to talk about that. So, but what I wanted to kind of muse about, and what was striking me is that another thing I hear from colleagues when I talk to them about the web is a very natural kind of reluctance to step onto what they look at as a runaway global freight train, that this is just so fast and everything's going so quickly, and just about the time you feel like you got one spot on the horizon, everything's rushing by you again, and won't this simply make the train go faster? And I guess one of the things I'd like to say is that as I think about the web actually lets lots of different speeds coexist. There are lots of different tempos on the web. Twitter's got a certain rhythm to it. Blogging has a very different rhythm to it, and it's one that most students are not really familiar with because they're much more about the real-time kind of Instagram sharing, and all that's great. But what I want to try to communicate to my colleagues is there's a certain pleasure and utility in the real-time, quick back and forth, but you can actually linger and take a long time to put something together, lovingly curated with links and images and animated GIFs, and put that out there as a different mode of speed on the web. It's one of the things I'm really excited about with Medium, which is aiming at longer form kinds of publication to the web to encourage people to say, no, this is not just about rush, rush, rush. And I noticed that when Medium puts their little recommended list in my email, they will typically say how long it's likely to take to read this little bit. And I'm still not sure how I feel about that, but it does suggest to me that this is one thing people are thinking about. Is the whole thing pell-mell, rush as fast as you can, or is there an opportunity on the web for different speeds of participation?
I think that really hits, to an important point. I see a lot of conversations that start on Twitter quickly, run into problems with, that small, 140 character medium. They can't express what they want to express, and so then they kind of have to take it somewhere else. And it is interesting to see, people try and take conversations that start on Twitter, get too complicated for Twitter, and then move to, something like Medium or a blog.
So one of the participants on Twitter, Nathan Sandoval, and I know this because he's one of my grad students from his Twitter link, says that so if curators act as literacy kind of upvotes, like if that's what you're kind of doing when you're curating, is it's kind of an upvote, and if everyone's vote has value, what makes the top of the digital literacy page? Like, and I think with this panel, if you had to, you had to choose, like, what would you emphasize first, and or can you even say that would be my question. What would be a web literacy that you feel like would get right now? For me, it would be that we have to a literacy around kindness, a literacy about creating a culture of kindness and opening up dialogue. So I'm curious what you all think. What would be your upvote for web literacies?
Well, knowing who to pay attention to in regard to a particular topic, curating the curators, it's sort of the positive side of crap detection. You need to know how to find your way to the good information, and we've got all kinds of tools for doing that. It's your judgment and your experience, and I think one of the things that you ought to be learning in school is how do you go out and learn for yourself by finding the people who know what they're talking about and adding them to your personal learning network. All of these skills really have to do with a combination of individual judgment and this kind of community creation of knowledge. The two have to meet, and they meet in human judgment. And I think that's what, it's not how do you use hardware, it's how do you use your judgment that we ought to be teaching.
So I guess, there's two ways I would come at that. One is, where do you start to get people hooked? And the other is sort of what's most missing from what we learn naturally through the tools that we use or experience of the web and the digital world. And I do think that what's easiest is just getting people to sort of see that the world of the web is something specific and different than just all of digital life, and that's where something like X-ray goggles is really helpful. In some ways, to be able to see the lines of the Lego, to see that this is a system that you can change. The thing that we have often put first as Mozilla, though, in terms of what's most important, and it's the wrong way to say it, and it's really been hard to get people interested in, is a little bit more what you can do with that Lego in terms of a remix and being able to build on top of other things. And if we just somehow could get it in the water, and I think we're really losing it in the water, that the digital world is remixable, that you can start on top of what others have done, and get that as a concept that clicked for people. We probably need different language for it. That, to me, seems to be the most important priority. And just as a counter example, I mean, if you think about the early days, Gardner was talking about the first web pages we made, early days of things like Tripod or even MySpace. It was clear that this is a nest you could build, a thing you could shade. And we certainly today are surrounded by even more creativity in many ways. But with something like Instagram or Facebook, for sure, while there's self-expression there, that idea that I can build on the work of those around me and that this is an open system that I can create from has disappeared in the way that we've structured mainstream everyday creativity online. And so the idea that remix and playing with the rest of the digital material around us, the rest of the creativity of our peers and colleagues and the rest of humanity, is actually different than just being on Instagram. And if we could make that mainstream, get it in the water, teach it through everyday use, I think that's the top priority.
Gardner or Laura, do you want to chime in on this at all?
I'm going to come in with some reminders about this week's and next week's goodness, but maybe Laura, you have you webmaker, you. Oh, Laura. I would love to hear what you have to say.
Well, I would actually just agree with Mark. I learned how to build the web by taking stuff that was already built and pulling it apart, and it's pretty much the same way that I've learned how to build just about all of the things that I've ever built, both in the physical and digital world. And I think that concept of remix is hugely empowering, because if you know how to remix, then it takes away a bit of the fear. You can get into it, and once you've remixed enough, you actually understand all of the component parts, and then you can build something from scratch. And the first time that you do that by yourself it's mind-blowing, completely mind-blowing. And as an educator and as somebody who teaches people through remix, I've seen what happens to people's faces when they do